Gentleman from North Carolina, I'll now recognize the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for convening this hearing. Thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony, both written and your answers to the questions that have been propounded so far. Ms. Madney, I wasn't planning on asking this question of you, but I want to follow up on the comment that you made just recently, and I think your summation kind of focus on spending. Every academic, every economist that I have come across in the last 6 months have all agreed that the Republican tax bill, the so-called big beautiful bill, increased the deficit. I assume you don't dispute that. Actually, let me read this to you, then you can answer. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, right, has estimated that bill will add $2.4 trillion to primary deficits over the next decade and $3 trillion to the deficit, including interest. So do you contest that?
Thank you for your question, sir. I actually reject the premise of this question because when you're adding to the deficit, you also have to think about what are the mechanisms doing so. As I mentioned in my opening statement, it's not just about balance on paper. This is not a simple accounting mechanism. You also have to take into account the economic impacts of the choices Congress is making.
Sure, so I understand that argument. Republicans on the dais here have made that argument. What you are essentially saying is that Elon Musk, the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, Mr. Massey, any Republican critics in good faith of this bill are wrong, that this calculation that the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget has delineated and produced is inaccurate and incorrect. And I don't know how you can make that argument. I suspect that your colleagues here, sitting alongside you, would not make that argument, but maybe I'm wrong.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Yes, in fact, they are all wrong, right? Yes, what do you mean you don't know how that she can make that argument? That's the reality of the situation. There's a lot more that goes into balancing a budget or just putting out these numbers that say, oh, well, this is going to increase the deficit over the next 10 years. They have no idea. Those are projections, sure. They run a bunch of numbers together. They add up everything in the bill and they look at what's going on. But once again, all of that is based on that CBO report that came out shortly after they passed the big beautiful bill that based all of their projections on a 1.7 GDP growth. What? 1.7% GDP growth. What? Are you kidding me with that? Like, seriously, like, what Donald Trump is trying to do is trying to expand the economy by a lot. If we look at the economy under the previous Trump administration, it was hovering around 2.5% for the most part. It shot up to almost 3 at one point and came back down to almost 2, but it was above 2 the whole time. If you go and look at the numbers, it was above 2 the whole time. So them running those projections on a 1.7% increase in GDP growth, like, hang on. Yeah, of course, the $2.4 trillion, that's actually not that much over into the deficit, right? There's other analyses done to the big beautiful bill that showed a surplus, for crying out loud. Plus, once again, you cannot just run these projections out based upon current numbers. What Donald Trump is trying to do with the government, he's trying to clean up the government. We just had Doge. None of the Doge cuts were factored into any of that. What Donald Trump is doing, firing all these employees, none of that was factored into any of this, folks. That's cuts, as a matter of fact. You know, eviscerating the Department of Education was not factored into that CBO report, folks. So that is highly disingenuous, and that is exactly why she is making that argument, and that is exactly why that argument makes so much sense. You just can't run these projections out and say, there you go, it's going to increase the deficit. Trump administration bad. Democrat, well, we're not going to mention Democrats because if we mention Democrats, holy crap, they're going to look even worse. So we're just going to ignore Democrats on this one. That's exactly what the CBO did. And they call themselves nonpartisan. Oh, get out of here. Like, go shove it up your That's what I say about that. But you guys do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe if you're new around here, share this video anywhere and everywhere you can, click that join button. You know you want to. Come on, you're a beautiful person, right? You got to. But anyway, without any further ado, here's the rest of the story.
Mr. Couchman, I assume you're not, I have seen some of your material previously in which you have amplified the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. I don't think you've taken issue with them in the past. Do you contest their analysis here? They're wrong?
I worked at the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget before this, and there are times that I agree with them, and sometimes I disagree. On this matter, it really comes down to how you think about the statutory baseline and whether you think that was realistic. And as we saw from the bond market, the public, and policymakers, that was not an accurate reflection of where folks expected revenue policy to be.
So how far off are they? $2.4 trillion over the next decade. What's you're saying that this bill didn't increase, will not increase the
relative to the
deficit at all?
statutory baseline, yes, but relative to what the bond markets and policymakers were projecting, no, it actually decreased deficits. Vice President Harris proposed extending most of these tax provisions as well to prevent the largest tax increase on the American people in history.
Well, I think, again, that it is rich, in my view, for organizations who predicate their existence on making the case for deficit-neutral policies and for decreasing the debt, so on and so forth, to enthusiastically endorse a bill in which a variety of experts, including conservative ones, all attest that that particular legislation actually increases the deficit. It is quite convenient now for Americans for Prosperity, just by way of example, to now conclude that the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget is wrong, and that in the case of Trump's so-called big beautiful bill, no, you've called it incorrectly. This, in fact, decreases the deficit. I think that argument is disingenuous, frankly, sir.
You got to love that appeal to authority right there. Instead of getting out there, getting into your office and going and doing the work, learning a little bit, just cursory knowledge about economics, you're going to appeal to an authority, and if whatever they say, that must go, I guess, with this guy. Let's keep going.
I really, in any event, you're entitled to your opinion, obviously, but I concur with Mr. Massey, and I applaud Mr. Massey for having the courage among Republicans to actually make an intellectually honest argument and to stand by his principles and vote against the bill because of what it will do to the deficit. So, again, that's my view.
Okay, look, I'm sorry, y'all, but just after calling this guy's argument, saying he doesn't quite buy into that Committee for Responsible Budget's analysis of this, he doesn't quite buy into that, calling that disingenuous, now he's going to go right on, backdoor that with a disingenuous argument. We know Thomas Massey voted against that bill for completely different reasons. We know Democrats voted against it because it was Donald Trump that proposed a lot of that, right? Donald Trump is the one proposing the tax cuts and making all that permanent. They voted against it because it was Donald Trump, not because it increased the freaking deficit. Yeah, if you look at some skewed numbers, of course it's going to look like that. I'm not saying it's not going to increase the deficit. What I'm saying is they don't know. Nobody really knows if it's going to increase or decrease the deficit. There's analysis that says it will, and there's analysis that says it won't. Hey, look, I'll take historical record over some analysis that bases their fundamental numbers off of numbers that we haven't seen for a very, very, very long time, folks. I love that disingenuousness coming from this guy, and then he's going to gripe at the other dude over there for making a disingenuous argument when we know Thomas Massey is voting against it because Thomas Massey always votes against anything that increases spending. There you go. If we spend more than we take in revenue, Thomas Massey votes against it. He's one of the only members of Congress that, under my proposed constitutional amendment, would actually stay. Let's keep going.
Sound budgeting is important to American prosperity. There's no question about it.
What was that?
Sound budgeting is important to American prosperity.
It doesn't feel like it. If it was important to you all, then you would have opposed this bill. You would have said, you know what, we ought to make the case for an extension of these various different tax credits and tax breaks that were embedded in that bill. But supporting the bill wholesale, I think your colleagues at the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, your former colleagues, I should say, I suspect that they're very disappointed because I think that they put forward a very honest treatise on this bill's impact.
See, and once again, now he's playing the shame game. Oh, they're going to be disappointed in you. Well, if the dude believed that it decreased the deficit, why the hell not advocate for it? Let's keep going.
And I can see that your colleague here Mr. Walker would like to jump in, so
I used to
feel
be on
free.
the board of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget.
Sure.
It all depends upon what assumptions you use, but there are more people that believe that it added to the deficit than not, okay?
Correct.
And let me just note that things
I
have been-
appreciate you conceding reality, sir.
Oh, that's right.
I mean, that's all I was asking of the other two witnesses.
One last thing. Things have been out of control since 2002.
Sure.
And both parties have controlled the Congress since 2002, and both parties have had presidents since 2002.
I hear you.
This is a bipartisan problem.
But here's the difference, Mr. Walker, and I appreciate that candor, and I appreciate the chairman's indulgence for just a few seconds, because I completely appreciate that point. And you, sir, have spent a great deal of time in your career making the case that both parties have to ultimately help bring their fiscal house into order. The issue I take umbrage with are witnesses who advocate solely on the basis that Democrats are responsible. And they do that simultaneous to supporting a bill that increases the deficit by $2.4 trillion over the next decade, so that my daughter and future generations to come are saddled with debt for the next 25 years. In any event, I digress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There we go, folks. So he ends his little speech right there with some positive reinforcement from the peanut gallery right there, and a giant straw man. That's what that is. I can't stand people who advocate for, oh, it's only Republicans' fault or it's only Democrats' fault. Well, that's not what neither one of those people are saying. Neither one of those people in their opening statements blamed the deficit problems on a single party. None of them did. None of those people at all. That's a complete and utter straw man coming from that dude. And once again, that entire thing was disingenuous, straw man, red herring, as a matter of fact, right there at the end, because that's not what the argument is, my dude. That's a completely different argument over here. Like, look, it is incumbent on both parties, because once again, the way the rules are set up, and they could change these rules, by the way. They could absolutely change the rules where a simple majority could get any appropriations across the line. They could change that, absolutely. But the rules that are set up and put in place right now, you need 2/3 majority for the most part, right? And, sometimes you just can't get that. Sometimes you just can't get that. But look, I don't understand. I have never understood why these people, once again, you might get Democrats and Republicans to agree a lot more if they would not fill all of these bills, even appropriations, with pork and nonsense. Right? Because they want to add this, they want this for their district, or they want this for their district. So they add it on, or they'll put in some abortion ban nonsense, some stipulation that if you don't cross this such and such threshold, then, we get abortion ban, or blah, 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 making all Democrats vote against it, specifically for electioneering. And that's what they do. They do that on purpose, just for electioneering purposes, folks, just to bludgeon the other side over the head. Both sides do this in almost equal amounts, right? Democrats, they do it a lot. They do it a bit more than Republicans, but both sides do it enough to say it's about equal, right? So, I'm tired of hearing all this bickering back and forth about all this nonsense. Why don't you guys just get the budget from the federal government, see what they're working with, see what kind of revenue we got coming in, what the projection for the revenue is going to be, base your budget, evaluate it off of that number right there, and write up your appropriations based upon that number, not a penny more. Not a single freaking penny more. Pass that. Pass it through the House. Pass it through the Senate. How can people vote against that? People obviously continually vote for deficit spending, folks. That's absurd. That's completely absurd. Like, let me know down in the comment section if you guys can go to your family, huddle your family into the kitchen, bring them to the table and say, look, this is what we're going to do this month. We don't make enough money to cover our expenses, so we're gonna get ourselves a credit card, and then we're gonna max out that credit card. And when we do max out that credit card next year, we'll make a payment. We'll make a payment with our tax return. There we go. And then we're gonna vote. We're gonna huddle the family again and vote to increase the credit line. Yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll just increase our credit limit. Like, are you serious? Like, that's what the debt limit was supposed to be for. It's a cap on these people trying to keep their fiscal house in order. And they can't seem to do that, folks. They can never seem to do that. And they continually vote, once again, over and over and over, to fund the government in a deficit because they all want their pet projects. They all want their pork. They want this money for their district, and we need this, and, Americans need health care. Let them get their own health care. Right? If we didn't tax Americans into oblivion, maybe they would be able to afford their own health care, for goodness sakes. I can't stand all these arguments, y'all. Look, I don't know how these people can live with themselves voting for deficit spending. I just don't get it, y'all. I really don't. And then all this bickering back and forth. Like this, they're still supposed to be talking about a constitutional amendment. But what are they talking about right there? Donald Trump and his big, beautiful bill and how Republicans are spending in a deficit. Like that was, once again, that's the whole red herring part right there. He's sitting there making the argument that, well, it's got to be both sides. Yeah, both sides are to blame. But I can't stand when one person is making the argument that it's all the other side, and that was the entire thing he was doing the entire time. It's all Republicans' fault. It's insane, y'all. It really is. These people are children. Petulant children that should not be allowed to govern. Not at all. Not in the least. That's why I say, the Matt Vann Amendment should be put in place. That if these people cannot vote to fund the government with the amount of money we take in revenue, then everybody gets expelled. Everybody in Congress gets expelled. Once again, like I said, that might be a nightmare come election day. But hey, so be it, folks. It's better than continuing what we've been doing for the past 25 years. It's better. Yeah, absolutely better than that. To not have enough Congress, to not have enough representatives, because maybe, just maybe, at that point, they might not destroy themselves, y'all. So it's absurd, but I think I've rambled on for long enough. Y'all let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. That's all I got on this one. Y'all don't forget to smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new around here. Share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. Click that join button. Sign up and become a member. That's the best way to help this channel expand and grow, y'all. But, without any further ado, it's the end of the video. So, if I could get you guys to kind of listen in for a second. Look. God has a plan for you, in particular, you. Yes, you. Yes, I'm talking specifically to you. That is right. And you might think, well, I'm just messaging to everybody that's going to watch the video. No, I'm not. I'm talking specifically to you. God has a plan for you. And if you haven't already turned your life over to Jesus, you must do so. You must. I'm just kidding, y'all. Look, he does. He has a plan for everybody, but right. So I've got to at least try to spread the word a little bit, y'all. Because we must rejoice in the fact that Jesus died on the cross to save us. He absolutely did, and that's just one of the most greatest aspects to being a Christian is to understand that somebody sacrificed their life to save yours. That's insane to think about, but it is something that you should probably dwell over. Anyway, y'all, like I said, y'all do all that other stuff for me. You guys try to have a good day. Stay logical. Peace.